Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are finally getting around to the Marauders, and I know I promised I would, or at least I said I would do it last week. I got super tied up and super distracted. There were, well, a lot of you guys know there was a lot of things going on, but we're covering Marauders, right? Now, here's the thing. Here's what's going on with Dawn of X. Dawn of X may or may not have a singular cohesive storyline that unites everything. It may have that. They may end up kind of building up to that or whatever the case is. The reality is that at the moment, Dawn of X is a branding initiative, right? So think of it like Dark Reign. Dark Reign was not a story arc. I guess it kind of was a loosely based story arc surround, involving Norman Osborn basically taking over S.H.I.E.L.D. and then dismantling it and replacing it with Hammer, his own company, and so on and so forth. But by and large, Dawn of X is a branding initiative, meaning that it's basically designed to signify a relaunch of the various characters, right? So it's like Heroes Reborn from back in the day. And so the idea behind this is that this is designed to basically give us like whole new titles and whole new teams. And Marvel's dumping them like gangbusters. It's insane. Within the span of like 2 to 3 weeks, we got Marauders, and then we get Excalibur, we get X-Force, we get Fallen Angels, we get all kinds of stuff coming out of this. Like, it's insane, all the content that they're dropping. And it's going to be like something new is coming out every week. And so we're going to cover it every week, but it's kind of bonkers. Anyway, Marauders, this is kind of interesting because when I first saw this, my immediate thought was the exact same as pretty much everybody else who's been reading X-Men for any real measure of time. And it was like the Marauders of Mr. Sinister, right? It was like, okay, so like we're doing a book about Mr. Sinister's Marauders, but then they released the roster for it. And I was like, this is not Mr. Sinister's Marauders. This is about as far as you get from Mr. Sinister's Marauders. But I'm kind of down with that, right? Because they got 2 Omega level mutants on there, right? You got Storm and you got Iceman. And honestly, I kind of think Bishop can be Omega level if they adjust his powers, like if they tweak his powers a little bit. But then they have 3. They have Emma Frost on the team as well. So it's like, dude, this is kind of nuts. But what this does is this initially picks up with basically the mutants grabbing some mutants who basically gathered together in Central Park, New York, and then leading them into one of the gates of Krakoa. Now, remember, we covered this during House and Powers of X, so I'm not going to go super hardcore into this. But the idea here is that in order for the mutant land, right, the mutant country of Krakoa, to be able to like grab different mutants from different locations and bring them in, at any point in time, gates can be sprouted up. Now, a lot of those gates were created artificially by Krakoa in different locations just because of the fact that it was so huge, right? Like, Russia's a huge place. These gates crop up, they pop up in different locations, and then basically mutants are led through those gates into the island of Krakoa. Now, remember, Krakoa can decide who gets in and who doesn't get in, but at the same time, the gates also function in such a way that if you're not a mutant, you can't access it. And the problem with this is that when Kitty Pryde goes to walk through the gate, she breaks her nose when she basically hits what's essentially just solid material. And this can go a couple different ways. It can go in the form of the fact that Kitty Pryde is not a mutant and can't access it, which begs the question, how in the world should she ever manage to pass through them before? Or Krakoa's not letting her through. And if Krakoa's not letting her through, then the question becomes, why? Why is Krakoa not letting her through the gates? And that's kind of the question being asked here, because what this does is it basically leads to Kitty Pryde really sometime later, alongside her dragon Lockheed, heading towards this island where all these mutants are basically, doing their thing. They're having like essentially like a great big huge party is really what's going to be going on, but she still can't access the gates here. And that's where the story starts to shift, right? That's where the story begins to shift here. And the reason why is because with Kitty Pryde being unable to access these gates, and with us not really being given a definitive answer as to why, then one of the things we find out, of course, is that she was basically running like Aaron's, the Wolverine. It's kind of crazy because like Wolverine comes running out of nowhere, right? And he's like, Kitty, did you get all the stuff? And she's like, yes, I got it all. And so it's like, what in the world did Wolverine want? Dude comes back with like beer and a case of whiskey, and it makes sense, right? So you end up getting this grocery list, right? Like Logan's shopping list, right? So you get ribs from Rendezvous in Memphis. I've never even heard of the restaurant. There's Canadian Club whiskey, which I've never had, beer, Cubano sandwiches, which I have had, and they're amazing. There's pomade, there's coffee. Like, basically, she's just running like a smuggling operation, more or less, for Wolverine. But the story really begins to shift, and it begins to pick up when she's telepathically contacted by Emma Frost. And the reason why is because if you guys recall during our videos on House and Powers of X, the idea behind having basically like this sort of black market trading system for the different medicines and things like that of Krakoa was to really operate in 2 fronts. The first was for mutants to basically wholly engineer this kind of trading system, right? So there would be the front side of the selling process, which is to say all the countries out there that basically support Krakoa and say like, we support what it is the mutants want to do, they're the ones who are going to be able to buy the medicines and the various things that Krakoa can offer in order to improve the lives of humanity. Those who don't support Krakoa don't get any of that stuff, right? Which I really agree with, right? I really agree with it. But in order to kind of keep things in somewhat of an equitable balance, the mutants are also the ones controlling the black market. So they kind of control the price of goods on the black market in order to ensure there's kind of a going back and forth. But the reality of this is that by creating a black market and basically saying, those of you guys who publicly do not support Krakoa, but privately want to get your hands on their medicine, then we can do that for you. Now, they don't really know it's the mutants who are pulling the strings. They don't really know it's the mutants who are doing it. As far as they're concerned, it's some shady clandestine organization or group somewhere that's making all this happen. But because of the fact that a lot of these countries that don't support Krakoa are in turn keeping their mutant population captive by serving as kind of a black market shipping company, what it also does is it gives them access to those underground places that aren't really letting their mutant population go. And so because of that, by operating as kind of a black market organization, it gets them into places they wouldn't normally be able to get into, and then in turn, they can liberate the mutants in that particular geographical location. So it's a pretty smart move, right? It's underhanded as hell, but it's a pretty smart move. And that's really the proposition that Emma Frost had pitched to Kitty Pryde. Like, is this something that you want to be a part of? And Kitty Pryde had been thinking about it for quite some time, but ultimately Emma Frost's response is, I need a definitive answer here. I need to know, are you in or are you out? And so that's when we kind of get this revelation that there are all these different places, Russia, so on and so forth. In Brazil, they have these kind of hounds that basically track down mutants, or at least keep mutants from being able to access the gates. But these gates in different locations are all cordoned off by military officials or government officials or what have you, and they're not letting people get through. They're not letting their mutant population leave. Now, for some places, for example, Russia, when Bobby Drake goes there and Bobby Drake is immediately attacked, in some cases, it's because mutants are used, right? We talked about that in our video on Colossus Explained, that when Colossus first developed his powers started popping up at a time when Russia wasn't exterminating their mutant population. Instead, they were forcing their mutant population to work as soldiers of the Russian military, hence the Winter Guard. But where Colossus was safe from that fate, a lot of mutants weren't. And so what that basically meant is that Russia basically managed to get their hands on a lot of superpowered beings, and they forced them to work for the Russian government. That's what's going on here. That's why there's opposition here. When Bobby Drake shows up, it's like, no. All superpowered beings are basically tools of the state. They work for us. They do what we tell them to. We're not letting them go. Like, we're not letting you guys, walk away from all this. At the same time, there's some plot threads that are thrown in here, right? Like, you end up going to Taiwan, you end up going to Taipei, and you end up having this woman who basically gets out in front of the news cameras and everything and says, my husband went through one of those gates and he vanished, and what happened to him, and I don't know what's going on with him. And you have Bishop who shows up and says, look, we're investigating your husband's disappearance. We don't have any record of him entering through the gates of any of the gates in Taipei. So, like, obviously the implication seems to be she's lying. These are plot threads that Jerry Dugan's going to build up over time. But it's a cool little moment here. It's a cool little scenario to see, like, these little things thrown out here and there in terms of people who are lying about what's going on, people who are trying to curtail public opinion to achieve a particular goal. It's a pretty smart move. But from here, what it does is it switches over to the reintroduction of Pyro. Now, when it comes to the character of Pyro in Marvel Comics, there have been a couple different versions. There's a version that anybody who ever watched X-Men the Animated Series or has been reading X-Men for a long time are aware of, which is St. John Allardyce. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce his name. Then there's Simon Lasker, who's the most recent version. This one here is St. John, right? This is the classic version of Pyro. In an effort to kind of clean up a lot of characters that were deemed as kind of unnecessary or to rework them or something like that, Marvel either got rid of them or they basically soft rebooted them. With the character of St. John, he died in 2001, right? He was removed in Cable number 87. He ended up coming back a few years later during the Ex-Necrosha storyline, but was killed off yet again. And so as a result of that, what you have now is this classic version back here again, but he's not really as brutal as his old school version. Instead, it's a lot more lighthearted. Now, that's one of the things about how Jerry Dugan's writing this story, and I hope it's one of the things you've noticed so far, is this is far more lighthearted than like a lot of the other stories that we've seen, right? It's not nearly as serious in tone as like Jonathan Hickman's storytelling. Now, that's the nature of Jerry Dugan, and it's one of the reasons why he shined so spectacularly when he wrote Deadpool. At least I loved his handling of Deadpool, but it's one of the reasons why it was kind of like, nah, when you were reading the Infinity War storyline. Jerry Dugan does better with like lighthearted and comedic stories than he does with like dark and hardcore stories, right? That's always kind of been my take on him. And so as a result of that, that's why this story seems a lot lighter than you would normally expect. And it's one of the reasons why right off the bat, Storm's like, well, one, you're drafted onto this team, and two, you can't kill people. You can't kill humans, which is kind of what he's always done, right? I mean, he has no love for humanity. Now, one of the other things that I want to kind of clear up here is the nature of Pyro's powers, because this will become important as we get further and further into what's essentially going to be the Marauders comics and Marvel. Pyro does not have the ability to create fire. He can't do that. What Pyro can do is control existing fire. Now, sometimes it's amplifying the size of that fire, right? He could take what's basically a candle and expand it out into this great big huge thing. He could do all kinds of stuff, create all kinds of different designs and all kinds. It's very, very intricate in terms of his ability to do that, but it's why you see him walk around with basically flamethrowers attached to him, because he can't actually create fire. That's not really what he does. It'd be cool if he did, because then he would be overpowered as hell, but he can't actually make it. So that's kind of something that you sort of have to go with. Now, having said that, the power of Pyro is still pretty cool, but what really comes out of this, and this is really the big thing to focus on here, is the power of Kitty Pryde. And the reason why is because Kitty Pryde is probably one of of the most underrated of the X-Men in terms of what she could really do. Like if you really pull out the stops, and if you give us a story like what we're getting ready to see right here, where it's like, okay, so Kitty Pryde has always kind of been the cheerleader of the X-Men until she wasn't, until she graduated and became kind of like one of the leaders of the team and different things like that. But no one's ever really shown what she's truly capable of like this does, and it's absolutely amazing. And the reason why is because what you have there is one of these Russian guys who basically uses a solar dampening suit. So when it comes to him being able to touch anybody out there, being able to blast Storm or Iceman, like it'll dampen their powers. It'll take their powers away temporarily. But the issue is that contact has to be made. With Kitty Pryde, it doesn't work that way. So the first thing she does is, of course, she phases, then she gets up to the guy, takes him down, and that guy's immediately out of the picture. From there, she single-handedly dismantles every single soldier. Like she basically like either she like they phase through her and she knocks them out. There's one time where she basically like shoots guys with bullets, which is kind of cool. I mean, shooting them is not the biggest thing ever, but one of the coolest moments is she grabs a gun, she phases it into two guys' legs and makes it solid again. And so they basically got like a gun in their legs, which is kind of screwed up. She phases into a tank, she rips grenades out of the sky. You know, she steals a sword from another guy after incapacitating him. It seems kind of like, okay, whatever, this is like a small little thing. But here's the thing, you can't hit what you can't touch. And that's why Kitty Pryde is probably one of the most powerful of the X-Men. It's the reason why, if you read the story, Wolverine, Enemy of the State, the What If story, where he basically kills all the superheroes in the Marvel Universe, it ends up being Kitty Pryde who's the one that takes him out, because of what use is the ability to slash through anything with adamantium claws if you can't touch it. That's one of the coolest things about Kitty Pryde, is like in this moment, you kind of get her as this character where it's like she can take all comers. And it's kind of a cool thing, because I mean, the only way to really get around that is to kind of wear her down, right? To the point where she's exhausted and she can't really keep going anymore because it's just too much for her to take, mental or physical or whatever the case happens to be. But of course, Pyro ends up channeling the fire of Lockheed, and then in turn, you know, using Dragon's Breath, basically like spray down a whole bunch of guys. It's pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. And so as a result of this, like one of the people that they're liberating has like an iPhone, which kind of begs the question, like if they're stuck in a camp, why do they have an iPhone? But still, like one of the people has an iPhone basically and is recording this message of Kitty Pryde, and she's like, and it's kind of cool, right? Because it reminds me of the A-Team. Like it's like, if you're a mutant and you can't get to Krakoa, then the Marauders will bring you home, right? Like we're the A-Team. It's kind of how it feels, right? It's kind of how it comes across. And that's why I love the Marauders so much, because it's not a super like, oh man, things are popping off and everything is going crazy. It's just a good old-fashioned fun read. And that's really what it should be, right? The nature of comics, it's not the politics, right? It's the enjoyment of the comics. Like it's fun reading the story. That's one of the reasons why I love the Marauders. It's fun. It's just a fun story to read. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. Like I'm really excited to see what happens, especially if they start encountering like these super OP broken mutants, like these super broken mutants. And so what you end up getting is, once they leave, Kitty Pryde starts addressing Storm. And when she's talking to Storm, one of the things to understand here is she's not addressing Storm as a member of the X-Men. She's addressing Storm as a surrogate mother. And the reason why is because if you haven't been reading X-Men for a long time, it's something that's kind of easily missed, something that you're not really familiar with. But when Kitty Pryde first showed up in the X-Men, she was like 15 years old, I think. And so basically, with the character of Storm, she became a kind of mother for Kitty Pryde, right? Like helping her navigate the waters of what it meant to become a woman when she was changing and she was going through this biological process in terms of her body, you know, growing and so on and so forth. A lot of the lessons that Kitty Pryde learned over the course of her life that led her to becoming the superhero she is today were taught basically to her by Storm. And so the relationship between the two is very much mother and daughter. And it's one of the reasons why Kitty Pryde basically tells Storm, I need you to stay here. I need you with me. Like I need you to stay with me here while I'm going on all this. They're really probably two of the closest friends. And so of course, following that, the Marauders are completely and fully formed, right? You've got Pyro, you got Kitty Pryde, you got Iceman, and you got Storm. So right off the bat, you already got two Omega level mutants here, which is going to make the team an absolute powerhouse, an absolute like hoss of a team. It's kind of nuts. But yeah, I love it. Like I really like this. So the next one we'll get into after this is going to be Excalibur, which is basically the return of Gambit and Rogue. I'm excited about this. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.